In 1975, I actually took an oath with 5 other gentlemen, became a sworn made member of the family. And just to show you how fortunate I am, the 5 guys that I took the oath with, they were all murdered later on, every one of them. None of them survived. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and my dad, John Franzese, they called him Sonny, that was kind of his nickname, was a very high-profile figure in the Colombo crime family. He was kind of like the John Gotti of his day. I'm sure many people have heard of John. My dad was just very, very high-profile, major target of law enforcement. You know, throughout the 1960s, he was indicted, charged with, various crimes, went to trial several times. So I dealt with all of that, during my younger age. At times getting flack in school from kids because my dad was, all over the newspaper. Your dad's a Mafia dad, so I'd fight in the schoolyard, stuff like that. But, inside the house, my dad tried to keep us as a family as best he possibly could. And, but that's how it was.
Do you feel like with your dad, you were in a certain way preconditioned for the crime?
My dad originally wanted me to go to school and be a doctor. That was his desire for me, and I had no desire to be in that life. But when he got he was convicted in a very serious crime. He got a 50-year prison sentence, and he went off to do his time when he was 50 years old in 1970. I was a pre-med student at Hofstra University in New York. And my dad said he was innocent. He said, I'm innocent of this crime. I'm not a bank robber. He allegedly masterminded a nationwide string of bank robberies. But he told me he was innocent. And, with a 50-year sentence, he would die in prison if he didn't get help. So I said, Dad, I got to help you out. I lost interest in school. Joe Colombo was the boss of my family back then. He kind of took me under his wing. Mike, what are you doing going to school? If you don't help your father out, he's going to die in prison. So that really impacted me. And I went to see my dad in the visiting room. He was in the penitentiary. And I said, Dad, I got to help you out. And that's when he wanted to, or he proposed me for membership in the family.
Can you tell me how the initiation happened? Is it true that there was actually a special Italian ceremony for that?
Yeah, when you get, first of all, somebody has to sponsor you or propose you into that lifestyle. You just can't go up to somebody that's part of the life and say, hey, I'd like to join. You can't do that. Somebody has to vouch for you, propose you, say you have what it takes. In my case, it was my father. And I was 21 years old, and then you go through like a pledge period where you have to prove yourself worthy to become a member. For me, that lasted 2.5 years or so. And, I had to do whatever I was told to do to prove myself worthy. It could have been something very menial. There's a lot of discipline in that life, a lot of authority, a lot of respect. And it could have been something very serious, I never shy away from this. That life at times is very violent. You're part of the life, you're part of the violence. There's no escape. I always say this, the Mafia, Cosa Nostra in America survived and prospered for well over 100 years under some very difficult conditions, law enforcement and other things going on. And the reason they did that was because of the organization, because of the structure, because there was consequences if you violated the policies and the rules. There was one boss that was the head of a family, and he had an underboss, which was the second in command under him. And then there was a position called consigliere, who was like an advisor to the boss. And then you had caporegimes or captains, and they were kind of the street bosses, and they were in charge of the soldiers. And soldiers were, when you just took the oath and you just came into that life, the rank as a soldier. And you can move up or stay a soldier all the time. It depends upon your individual circumstance. So after about 2.5 years or so, I proved myself worthy. And in 1975, I actually took an oath with 5 other gentlemen, became a sworn made member of the family. And just to show you how fortunate I am, the 5 guys that I took the oath with, they were all murdered later on, every one of them. None of them survived. I'm the only one out of that group.
You've mentioned several times the term made man. Can you explain what that means?
Yeah, that's the term. You're a made guy after you take the oath, after you go through your recruit period and you've earned it, so to speak. then you take an oath in a very solemn ceremony. But once you take that oath, you're a made guy. That's what they say. You got straightened out, now you're a made guy. And it's a privilege, you know, on the street to be, to take that oath and become a made guy. You know, there's certain perks that come with it, but there's also consequences if you make a mistake. The ideology behind that is you're part of a brotherhood. When I got into the life, they told me, listen, wherever you go in the world, people will have your back. Don't ever worry about your wife, your daughter, your sister, your mother. Nobody's ever gonna touch them or hurt them. So it's kind of a brotherhood, and for a guy, you know, it's a powerful thing. To me, there was nothing more powerful than this bond, this relationship, this I got your back, you got my back among men. And a lot of guys born in, you know, on the street in Brooklyn, Chicago, cities like that, they look up to guys in that life, in Cosa Nostra and Mafia. It's appealing to them. The organization as a whole can become very attractive to people, and you know, I understand it because I was one of them. I was fortunate in that I knew how to use that life to benefit me in business, and I was very aggressive on the street. I was kind of entrepreneurial, so you know, in the United States, we had tremendous control right into the White House. I mean, we had politicians that worked with us. We controlled all the unions in America, all the major unions. And when you have union control and political connections, you control a lot in that country. We had about 750 made guys that actually took the oath. We had a lot of associates, but 750 guys. And we controlled, you know, quite a bit of business and other things that went on in the New York area, New Jersey, you know, up and down the East Coast. And across the country, there were actually 9 families in various cities. So it was, again, a pretty big organization.
What would you say was the highest point of your crime career?
You know, with the help of others, I developed a scheme to defraud the government out of tax on every gallon of gasoline. And, you know, it was probably one of the biggest earning deals that we came across since the days of Prohibition. It was a tremendous amount of money. At the height of my operation, I ran it for almost 8 years. We were bringing in $8 to $10 million a week coming into our operation. And it was very lucrative. As a result of that, I was appointed a caporegime, or captain, which is a very powerful position. I had a number of men under me. I was working with the Russian mob. They were my partners in that scheme. And we were up and down the East Coast, you know, from New York all the way down to Florida, selling gas. We were selling 500 million gallons of gas a month. So it was a big operation, and that kind of propelled me into, you know, another level in that life.
Is it true that you were the highest paid Mafia member since Al Capone?
Well, you know, the media, Vanity Fair, I think, wrote an article and said that I was the highest earner in that life since the days of Al Capone. I mean, that's what they said. That's not what I said. I don't go around measuring people's wealth in that life, but I will tell you that, you know, the money that I was generating was extremely substantial. And unless people were involved in drugs, which I never got involved in, I hate anything to do with drugs. As a matter of fact, our family didn't get involved in drugs to any great degree. I don't think anybody was bringing in that kind of revenue. I really don't. I never heard of it, and I never seen it. Guys were doing okay, but that was, you know, we're bringing in $10 million a week. I mean, that's a lot of money. And, you know, for a while it was pretty good, but it also, you know, made me a major target of law enforcement because my dad had a big name. So from the moment I entered that life, I had law enforcement all over me. So it started from day one with me when I was 21 years old, but I'd gotten arrested several times. You know, always fighting law enforcement, so that wasn't something that was strange to me. I mean, it was part of my life, you know, almost on a daily basis as I was rising in the ranks and doing my stuff. But, you know, one of the dangers or the horrors of that life is that, you know, you make a mistake, you don't really know it, your best friend walks you into a room, you don't walk out again. And obviously, you know, I spent over 20 years in that life at a high level, so, you know, I knew situations like that. And it was one night when I got called into a room, I didn't know if I was going to walk out again, and it was probably the low point of my time in that life. And obviously I'm here, so it worked out, but it was, it's a tough situation. When you know, believe you're facing death, it's pretty tough. And, you know, people have asked me, you know, why didn't I cut and run, or why didn't I escape? You It wasn't heroic on my part. It was more or less robotic. I was such a product of that life that I felt, hey, if this is my time, it's my time.
Have you ever been scared?
I was scared when I walked into that room that night. I mean, look, like I said, it was a very scary situation. When you think you're going to go, it's tough. But what it taught me, is that I could face death. I tell people all the time, if you're a made member of that life, meaning you took the oath like I did, and you die of old age and you die free, you've really accomplished something, because it's a tough life to navigate.
Can you tell me more about what happened in that room, or not really?
Well, yeah, I mean, it was over money, and there was an article that came out that said that I was becoming powerful enough to break away from the family and start my own family, that I was bringing in, over $1 billion, which there was no truth to the article at all. Some reporter just made it up. But, I did have a big crew. I did have the Russians working with me. I mean, I had, a lot going on. I had a jet plane, a helicopter, I had houses all over the country. So, I mean, we were doing very well. My whole crew was doing well. So people got that impression, but there was no truth to it. But it gets into people's heads, so the boss of my family, people are watching. My father was coming out of prison on parole, so he was a powerful guy. So people get ideas. In that life, it's all about maintaining power and control. And when people think there's a threat to that, there's a concern. So they kind of, walked me into that room, making me believe that maybe they wanted me to understand that they were still in control. And it was a scary situation, because, people were thinking I was making more money than I was turning in and stuff like that. But once I got into the room, and that was fine, and I was, I got a little bit upset, because I said, hey, I'm bringing more money in than you guys have ever seen before, and I'm being held accountable like this. And I started to get a little angry, and then I realized I'm talking to the boss. You don't get angry with the boss, I said, I'm going to walk out of here. Better keep my composure. But I was mad. After the fear, when I got into the room, then I got angry, but kept my cool, as usual, and walked out of the room. But it was an impression that was made on me, and I didn't like it. I said, this is not what this should be about. Because I was loyal to the family. I mean, I was doing the right thing, and you don't want to be held accountable when you're doing the right thing.
What was the point that got you in prison?
Well, like I said, I became a major target of law enforcement. I was indicted 5 times in the state, and I went to trial 5 times, and I was either acquitted or dismissed in every case. I beat them all. And then I was indicted in the state of Florida on a racketeering case. I was indicted in New York on 2 federal racketeering cases, one brought on by Rudy Giuliani. I'm sure you know that name. And I went to trial on that one for several months, and I was acquitted in that case also. So I had a pretty good record of beating them at trial. But I finally took a plea to another racketeering case. It involved tax fraud, mainly the gasoline case. So I took a plea on that because I knew eventually I was going to go down. I mean, I was too big a name. I was too big a target. And unfortunately in New York, when these racketeering laws came in, if you got convicted in racketeering, there was guys that were getting 50 and 100 years. And I was one of the youngest guys. I would have probably gotten 200 years if they convicted me. So I realized I was in trouble. So I tried to cut my losses. I had met a young woman that I fell very much in love with. She's now my wife of 37 years. And she was really the catalyst that caused me to have second thoughts about remaining in that life and trying to get out. So when I took a plea, I got a 10-year prison sentence. I had a $15 million restitution. I had a jet plane and a helicopter. I had to surrender it all as part of my forfeiture. And I thought that was the best way to cut my losses. Do some time in prison, give the government some money, marry this new young girl, move out to California and try to get away from the life. So that was kind of the plan. I personally lost, between legal fees, money that I surrendered to the government, close to $100 million. I mean, listen, I tell everybody all the time, you get involved with the government, believe me, even if you win the case, it's going to cost you so much money in lost revenue, in money to legal fees to defend yourself. If you do happen to go to prison, the losses that you take, through that time, I mean, it cost me a lot of money. There's no question about it. So the FBI, the federal government, they tried to make a cooperating witness out of me. They really wanted me to cooperate. When I walked away from the life, you know, there was a contract on my life from my boss, because you're not allowed to do that. And people were upset with me on the street. My father even was upset with me. So the government used that. They came into the prison and they said, you know, you're a dead man anyway, Franzese. Cooperate with us, we'll put you in the program, witness protection program. But I didn't want to do that. I wasn't looking to hurt anybody, wasn't mad at anybody. I just wanted out of the life. They didn't take no for an answer, so they kind of moved me around to different prisons, you know, never letting me get too comfortable. And I spent 2.5 years, actually 29 months and 7 days in solitary. I was in the hole. And that's a 6x8 cell, 24/7. And they kept me in solitary and lockdown for quite some time. So they gave me a rough time.
What did it feel like to be in solitary confinement for such a long time?
Solitary is difficult. You know, I learned through that experience, we weren't meant to be solo creatures. We were meant to be social. And a lot of guys, when the lights went out at night, you heard a lot of moaning and groaning. A lot of guys did not do well, and I understood it. For me, it was difficult, no doubt, but I got through it. You know, I became a person of faith, you know, through that experience, and that helped me tremendously. I had a very strong determination to get home to my wife and my little babies that were at home, and I fought my way out of there. You know, it was tough, though. I don't want to let anybody think anything different. Solitary is a very difficult situation to navigate.
So talking about your life after prison, how did you adjust to it?
You know, it was a hard adjustment because I had to leave New York. I moved out to California because I would have never made it in New York. You walk away from that life and you stay in New York, I wouldn't have lasted, no doubt. But I had to rebuild myself under some difficult conditions. I still had people on the street upset with me. I knew people were trying to come after me, so I had to be mindful of that. And then I was like a fish out of water for a while, you know? I mean, I never really had a job. The last job I had was when I was 16 years old, you know, working in high school in the summer. So I always worked for myself. I always had to get things going on my own. So I have to come out in LA and now start a whole new life. So it was difficult. You know, but again, I'm a pretty determined guy. I'm fairly resourceful, and I have a head for business. So we got started. It took a while, you know, it took a couple of years before I really got on my feet. And again, you know, I was fortunate in that the whole speaking career that started for me was nothing I ever envisioned, but it worked out. You know, from the moment I got out of prison, I was sought after to speak with certain organizations. So I do a lot of work with juvenile delinquents, gangbangers. I spent a lot of time with prison with a lot of kids coming into the system at a young age. Everybody looks at Mafia, Cosa Nostra as the biggest gang in the world, and you know, to some degree we were. So when I speak to them, I speak from experience, I have credibility, and many of them listen. They really do, and I think we were able to save a lot of lives or redirect a lot of lives, you know, as a result of that. You know, I tell them it's important who you're accountable to in life. When I was on the street, I was accountable to my oath, I was accountable to my boss. As a result, I spent every day in criminal activity, you know, and I ended up in prison. We as adults created the environment that these young people are growing up in today, and it's tough, man. It's tough to navigate, and we got to help them. So I try to do my part.
When you look back at everything you've been through, how do you feel about your life?
Well, you know, look, people ask me, do I have regrets? And obviously there's things that I did in my former life that I regret now. You know, there's times I think I deal with that. My wife says to me, you know, there's a lot of times I'm fighting in my sleep, you know, and things come back to you because, you know, you see a lot during that time. It's like, you know, the way soldiers who experience things in the war, when things are horrific, you know, you remember them. And you can't make up for what you've done in the past. It's done, you know. I don't do what I do to make up for that. I do what I do because as a person of faith, I believe that, you know, God knows our hearts. He knows our intents. We can't pull a scam on him. We can't defraud God. So if we're doing the right things, you know, it'll work out in the end. You know, the horrible thing is I speak to so many men when I go into prisons. I have a prison ministry. they're in their 50s and 60s, and they look back and they say, Mike, look what I've done with my life. I spent 15 years, 20 years here. I lost my wife. My kids don't talk to me. And I tell them straight out, the street life is dead end. You're going to end up in prison or maybe dead at some point in time. I tell them straight out also, in this life, we are who we hang out with. You pick the wrong crowd, you hang with the wrong crowd, they're going to lead you in the wrong direction, you're going to get in trouble.
Tomorrow, I said at 7 o'clock in the morning, go and get Kennedy. That was my sawn-off shotgun. It was named after President Kennedy. I said, and I want one chamber, one buckshot filled with rock salt, and the other one with the normal buckshot in, all right? Yeah? I'm not messing about with these people. They're dangerous. I'm going to shoot them.